This is Jay Sekulow. The ACLJ blocks the Department of Justice and D.C. officials from destroying important evidence.
Keeping you informed and engaged, now more than ever. This is Sekulow. We want to hear from you. Share and post your comments or call 1-800-684-3110. And now your host, Jay Sekulow.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to the broadcast. We will be taking your calls at 1-800-684-3110. As you know, we have been engaged in the pro-life fight for decades. I mean, literally 4 decades. And the fight over the years has changed. It's gotten more complicated. We saw the great victory, the overturning of Roe versus Wade. But there was a horrific situation that was taking place in Washington, D.C., where the bodies of 5 preterm babies were discovered by the D.C. Metropolitan Police Department. The children were apparently from the West Washington Surgery Clinic in Washington, D.C., a facility operated by the late-term abortionist. Instead of ensuring that the horrific deaths of these children were properly investigated, which is actually what the law requires, the police made the assumption that each child died as a result of a legal abortion. They made this assumption without conducting any investigation or any medical evaluation or autopsies. In fact, some doctors have examined the pictures of these babies and found evidence that would support the conclusion that these children were killed through illegal and egregious partial birth abortions. So it's discovered, then they want to destroy the evidence. This is the evidence of a possible crime. We'll get into the whole aspect of a dignified burial. But the law required a real criminal investigation be taking place, CC.
Right.
And they didn't do it.
And what's crazy is the medical examiner is the one that was going to destroy the bodies of these babies. But on behalf of, they actually got a direction letter from the Department of Justice to go ahead and destroy these 5 babies' bodies because they didn't need them anymore. But they've not done an investigation. So they literally were going to destroy evidence of partial birth abortion, which is illegal, and they don't care to even look into it. And what's amazing is another kind of twist to this is that the pro-lifers that actually brought these babies' aborted bodies to the attention of the police, they actually now have come under scrutiny, and they had charges filed against them. Yeah. So they don't go after the abortionist, but they go after the pro-lifers that actually turned these babies over to the police.
We have been working with Pat Mahoney, the Christian Defense Coalition, for 40-something years. He used to be originally when we met, he was the communications director for Operation Rescue. Remember that protest in front of the Chinese embassy that we were successful in making sure he had access to the public streets and sidewalks? That was our work with Pat Mahoney. So we've got a long history with him. He's going to join us in the next segment of the broadcast. What I want you to understand here is they want to provide, and by the way, Pat's group wants to provide a dignified burial for the bodies, the remains of these children, which I think is really appropriate. But what I want you to understand is that this case should be a criminal investigation being conducted by Metropolitan Police detectives, not the Department of Justice and the D.C. Metro Police saying dispose of the evidence. And that's how they call it, get rid of the evidence.
Yeah, and that is very telling. Again, that the Biden administration and the police department don't want these bodies examined to show that they were done, illegally by a partial birth abortion procedure.
So for 2 years, and despite the fact that the D.C. law requires, as I said, medical autopsies after these mysterious deaths, nothing had been done. We were prepared to file an emergency writ of mandate in the Washington, D.C. courts to make sure these bodies were not destroyed. We didn't have to do that because of the quick action of our legal department. The D.C. Metro said they will not be destroying these unborn children. They will not be cremating the remains. And now we still may have to go to court on it because we'll see where it plays out. We're going to get more into this in the next segment. The fight for life, folks, is front and center at the work of the American Center for Law and Justice. And I want to encourage you to go to ACLJ.org. That's ACLJ.org and support our work. Become a champion for liberty, a champion for life, a champion for freedom. If you give monthly to the ACLJ, you become a champion. We're at 19,265 champions, which is great. We want to get by the end of this month to 19,500. Go to ACLJ.org/champions.
Some people think champions are born, that it's a title that requires something only a handful can ever possess.
There are times in our lives that we are called, every one of us, to step up and serve a cause greater than ourselves.
Even when the loudest voices in the room say it's wrong, that it can't be done. It can be a difficult stand, but it's one any of us can make, including you.
You can be the change. You can make that difference.
You can be a champion. We cannot do what we do without you.
By becoming a monthly donor, you can become a champion of life.
A champion of liberty, a champion of freedom.
Please join us. Become an ACLJ champion today.
ACLJ champion reporting for duty. And I say it that way because without you guys, I could not bear the news that I'm hearing. You're fighting for decency worldwide.
Hey, Jordan. Hey, Jay. I just want to let you know that I've supported ACLJ for 30 years and continue today. Thank you for all that you do.
Yes, I'm a small monthly donor for several years. I love that you explain the law according to the Constitution and that you fight for everybody, the big guy and the little guy.
I can't think of how many times the ACLJ were working over Christmas and Thanksgiving and New Year's while the rest of us are on vacation. Is there any other organization in our country that would be fighting for these kinds of things?
This country, I believe, is in an emergency. You've said it, Jay, but we are being attacked in the legal realm. We need brilliant and dedicated attorneys for what ails us. Let's make sure the ACLJ has the armor it needs through our giving to fight for us. Please join our family of supporters. Have the peace of mind to face the new year boldly.
Welcome back to the broadcast. We are taking your calls and comments at 800-684-3110. ACLJ front and center on the life issue, have been for 40 years. It's changed since Dobbs, and now this was a very unique case. Joining us on the phone is our good friend, the president and executive director and founder of the Christian Defense Coalition, Pat Mahoney, who we've worked with for almost 40 years. Pat and I go way back to the Operation Rescue days. He's been involved, of course, in that protest in front of the Chinese embassy during the human rights issues there, so he's been a human rights activist for a long time. Pat, tell us again, we kind of gave it a quick summary in the opening segment, but what was the concern here? What did you find out?
Okay, Jay, well, 2 years ago, two pro-life activists working with the group POW saw a medical waste person coming out of late-term abortion clinic in Washington, D.C., and they amazingly asked him, could they have what was in this large barrel? And he must have had pro-life tendencies, leanings, guilt. Anyway, he gave them the barrel. In the barrel, there were 100 aborted children, but of notice were 5 late-term aborted children. And at least 2 of them, Jay, were 8 months old and looked like they were aborted via partial birth abortion, which was illegal. The medical examiner took those bodies 2 years ago, those 5 late-term aborted children, and the ACLJ, members of Congress, pro-life organizations immediately demanded an autopsy to find out if infanticide happened, if the law was broken in our nation's capital. For 2 years, they've done nothing. A week ago, today, Monday, it was told that the Department of Justice had told the Washington, D.C. medical examiner to discard, cremate the bodies. Now, of course, these are children. They deserve honor and dignity. Their lives have value, purpose, and meaning, whatever the abortionist felt or Mayor Bowser felt or the Biden administration felt. And we thought it was critical that they have a honorable burial with dignity.
Pat, let me ask a question on that, because I'm with you. I don't like the babies being treated like they're debris. Right. And so what were you planning? What if you were able to get custody of these children? What were you planning on doing?
Well, giving them it's called a release of transfer. I've been working with the Catholic Diocese here in Washington, D.C. They are interested too. So let's say I got custody of these babies, I would turn them over to the Catholic diocese. There is a Catholic cemetery in D.C., Catholic funeral directors, and we would ensure in a service that these children were given honor, that they were respected, and they had a proper burial, Jay, instead of ending up in an ash heap somewhere. And it was amazing. Just to your listeners, you wonder, should you support the ACLJ? I'm saying yes. I'm on a long prayer walk in the battlefields of Fredericksburg, Virginia. I text Jay early in the morning. He gets right back to me last Monday and says, we're going to put our team on it. I hear from Olivia in Virginia Beach, Benjamin in Washington. And anyway, this incredible team gets on. We file our affidavits. Katie and I, my wife and I, requested the babies. And I love this moment, Jay. We don't get too many of them, but it was great. So we're hearing the babies are going to be cremated Friday without a dignified burial. Your team, the ACLJ team, with Benjamin and several other ACLJ attorneys, sent an email to the general counsel of the Washington, D.C. medical examiner, and I love this. They said, if you do not respond to us by 12:30 p.m. on Friday, we are going into court after you. And I don't know all about the writ of mandamus, all the technicalities there. But, Jay, listen to this. At 12:26, 4 minutes before that deadline, the general counsel for the D.C. medical examiner contacts them, and hours before these babies were to be cremated, and says they will not be destroyed. They will not be cremated, and we are considering all options. There are three groups: the diocese, myself represented by the ACLJ, and 45 members of Congress.
Well, look, I mean, here's the great news in this is, first of all, that you were aware of the situation. You notified us, and immediately we put a team on it. And the end result is, at least for now, it's not over. At least for now, they're not destroying the children. They're not going to destroy it, which is also evidence of a criminal trial that they failed to investigate.
Yeah, and that is what is so ridiculous, too. Obviously, these are children that deserve a decent burial, as Reverend Mahoney said, absolutely. But it's also evidence in a criminal trial. Right. And for the Department of Justice, Biden's Department of Justice, to send a directive to the chief medical examiner and say, dispose of those bodies, that is inexcusable. That is inexcusable. They're trying to get rid of evidence that shows illegal abortions were taking place at this abortion clinic. And it shows you, again, the abortion distortion. Yep. They do not want any kind of condemnation against abortion. You
know, Pat, you and I go back a long, long time, and I think about the early days of the Operation Rescue Movement. And we had experiences not too different from this with aborted children. And the fact is that they are human beings that deserve dignity and respect.
Jay, an Irish proverb says we show honor and respect for the living by how we honor the dead. And I want to address that point about evidence. Lauren Handy of Powell is facing 11 years in federal prison for a peaceful sit-in at this very abortion clinic. In fact, she was one of the people that found the babies. And her whole contention and defense was she was there to stop illegal activity. She peacefully sat in to stop partial birth abortions. So these children are material evidence in her sentencing. She was found guilty because they hadn't done an autopsy, and she's going to be sentenced in May, maybe up to 11 years in prison. And we just have to wonder, Jay, did the Department of Justice want to discard these children before her sentencing came up and ensure that there was no evidence entered in her case?
Look, I think you have to – all of that has to be part of the assumption process here. And what I want our listeners and our members of the ACLJ, especially you ACLJ champions, when we talk about these cases with people like Pat Mahoney, Pat's the client. They need legal representation so we can go in, if necessary, there are writ of mandamus, to go into court to get a just resolution. Your support enables us to do it. And the fact is, Cece, as you look at this now, the reality is This was a destruction of evidence case, not only a pro-life case, but it was a destruction of evidence case by the Department of Justice and the D.C. Medical Examiner.
Yeah, and this is the perfect example of us needing to be able to act in a moment's notice, which we did here. Just like Reverend Mahoney said, we got the evidence, we fired off the letter, and literally with 6 minutes, the deadline we gave, we got an announcement that, yes, we're not going to be destroying these babies. But that's why champions, ACLJ champions, are so important, because these kind of situations come up without us knowing, and we need to be able to act immediately on them.
Let me ask you this, Pat. For people that want to support your great work, as I do support Pat's work at the Christian Defense Coalition, where's the best place for them to go?
Actually, Jay, we now just work mostly through Facebook and Twitter. That's our most vibrant, active way, because we can get immediately. So just Rev Mahoney on Facebook and Rev Mahoney on Twitter. We have opportunities to give there. And once again, I do want to say to all those who support the ACLJ, this was literally put together in hours after I reached out to Jay. And so thank you for that, Jay, and thank you for the stellar work of the ACLJ. And finally, continue to pray, brothers and sisters. Yep. These babies are still in the morgue, and we still have a way to go here.
The case is not – I want to be clear there, Pat. The case is not over. They said they're not doing anything right now. We have a writ of mandamus prepared if necessary, and we'll take the appropriate action if we need to. Hopefully we do not. But, Pat, thanks for being a champion for life yourself, and it's always an honor to work with you and support your work. Folks, this gives you the perfect example of what we do at the ACLJ every day. These are real people like Pat Mahoney that need real help. They need sophisticated legal counsel to walk through a very sophisticated area of the law when you're dealing with the human remains. But there's law on that, and we were able to put it together.
Yeah, and just not only did Reverend Mahoney get involved, but Congress got involved. And we actually have Chip Roy that tweeted out, this is a welcome development. We are so grateful for the work of the ACLJ and everyone in the pro-life movement to prevent this evidence from being destroyed so that justice can be sought for these children.
Let me ask you to do this. Go ahead and join the ACLJ's champion team. That means you can give monthly, whatever the amount is. You go to aclj.org, become a champion for life, a champion for liberty, a champion for freedom, and give monthly. Goal here, $19,500 by the end of the month. We started with about $15,000 in October. We've added $4,500. We want to keep that momentum going. aclj.org/champion. If you can donate monthly, you're going to be standing for life, liberty, and freedom. Again, aclj.org/champions. Got an update on Israel coming up with Rick Rennell. You're not going to want to miss it.
The ACLJ's work at the UN Human Rights Council is extremely important.
We're taking specific, concrete action to protect those that cannot speak out for themselves.
The Human Rights Council is the entity within the United Nations body that is responsible for promoting and protecting all human rights.
Lives are on the line here. This is putting real cases with real people in front of the UN.
As the UN is currently the international stage to address these issues, we want to make sure we are there speaking up for the victims of religious persecution who are often dismissed and overlooked. Ministry of Presence is actually a very effective tool when fighting for justice.
Putting this forward before the Human Rights Council is a very important part of our advocacy for people that really can't speak up for themselves.
You get to name and shame publicly world powers. No other place you can really do that. You can do it on your radio broadcast. That's not our audience, though. These are international actors. You get to go into their home at the UN, where that's their safe space for a lot of these bad actors, and call them out.
Through our European Center for Law and Justice, which is an NGO, we participate in each session, drafting written submissions and delivering oral interventions covering the most egregious human rights and religious liberty violations.
We do it at a very different level.
You've got to push and push.
It's important to be front and center, because what that does is enable us to report firsthand. And what we're doing is getting actual action from this. People released from prison because of our advocacy at these levels.
We are committed to defending religious liberty and human rights worldwide, and we will continue to be actively engaged at the UN Human Rights Council and with its subsidiaries every chance we get. Visit aclj.org for more information.
taking your calls at 800-684-3110. First two segments, we dealt with the life issue. We're now turning our attention to the Middle East. And the IDF says yesterday 2 hostages were rescued from Gaza. That's because they went into Rafah. Rick Grinnell, our senior advisor for international affairs and national security, former director of national intelligence and ambassador to Germany. Rick, there's a lot of pressure coming on Israel from the Biden administration, a ton of pressure, trying to stop the move into Rafah. That seems to be because there's a lot of people in Rafah and they're trying to get them out, but there's a big Hamas stronghold there. And obviously the sense is, you don't have to read between the lines too much here, that some of those hostages are there. 2 have now been freed. What's your sense of what's going on?
Well, it was troublesome to see the Biden administration tell the Israelis to back off from Rafah, and then the Israelis ignored Joe Biden and went in and rescued 2 hostages. Look, I think that the United States role needs to be to support Israel right now while we're trying to get these hostages out. That's the first thing. I don't think we should be talking about ceasefires or anything other than let's get the hostages out. You can't really talk about a ceasefire or rebuilding Gaza or all the things that we want to get to until Hamas releases the hostages. That is the number one issue. And by the way, Jay, it's been more than 125 days and we have Americans that are being held hostage.
Yep. We now know that Israel uncovers Hamas tunnels under UNRWA's headquarters in Gaza. And we even know that at least Israel's claiming that the terrorists were siphoning off electricity from that site. So this was at UNRWA's headquarters, the relief agency, and there are tunnels under there. Now, we know the UNRWA employees were holding hostages. I want to bring a federal lawsuit, by the way. I'm meeting in our offices in Virginia Beach on Monday with a lawyer that I work with that does a lot of counterintelligence, counterterrorism litigation against Iran. We're looking at a lawsuit, though, against UNRWA itself because we were funding their people who were holding Israeli and Americans hostage.
Look, I think that it's not too much of a jump to say that American tax dollars through the UN were funding a terrorist organization. We've seen the proof now, and that's against the law. It's actually against the law to fund known hostage groups and to somehow harbor or give aid to terrorist organizations. No American wants to do that. And what we've now proven is that this UN agency, which is, by the way, designed in theory to help starving Palestinians, a humanitarian endeavor, which who can't agree with helping people who are starving and homeless. That is the whole ideal. And many Americans sign up for that ideal. The problem is in reality, that's not what's happening. And I think that we can go through UN program after UN program where we're sold this idealistic endeavor to help people. And then we find out that there's nefarious reasons for the actions, and our money is going to support programs that we don't agree with. So we've got to get to the bottom of this. The UN should use this as a red alert to clean up the other programs that they're funding without proper management.
UNRWA is not funded by the United States right now. Germany has laid back on that as well. We have filed, CC, today an action at the United Nations Human Rights Council.
Right. So the 55th session of the Human Rights Council is starting, and we file written submissions each session, and every time we can support Israel, we do. So this is our written submission supporting Israel, and we basically say it's imperative that the international community unconditionally condemn Hamas's actions for what they are, war crimes, and hold Hamas and its allies responsible for their continuing atrocities. We just want to keep pointing out that Israel has a right to self-defense, and what Hamas did was war crimes, and the international community needs to condemn it, not support it, and not fund it through UNRWA.
Rick, the thing that has happened, which does happen in these situations, is October 7th starts looking like a distant memory. And part of what we have to do here at the ACLJ is remind the international community of the atrocities that were created, that it violated international human rights law, international law, and the international law of armed conflict. Not that Hamas cares, but the rest of the world should care. And you spent 10 years at the UN, so you know what it's like there. It's a tough place to work, but I tell people that say, well, why the UN? You have to be there even though it is a hostile environment.
Oh, you have to be there, and thank God that that we are, the ACLJ is there, so we are holding the UN to account. One of the only organizations that really pushes back on the UN. Look, I think, Jay, the information that has been revealed on UNRWA is devastating to the UN. I think at this point, the UN is going to have to stop the UNRWA program altogether. They're going to have to rethink how they do, refugees or outreach for humanitarian causes. I don't think that UNRWA will ever be able to get back its credibility. They've lost its credibility. They've funded terrorists. They should shut down the whole program and rethink how we're going to do this.
Let me ask you, I want to go back to the UN and with UNRWA and the keeping of hostages. Obviously, this is a major issue, and I think there's legal action that we can take. But, Rick, coming from your perspective, former ambassador, former UN official, former director of national intelligence, this is a very complicated situation in the Middle East that is really spiraling a little out of control. We've had the engagement against our own military and a fairly tepid response. And I know you want to use diplomacy as much as you can. It all comes down to, it looks like, with the hostages and Hamas, that the intermediary is Qatar. What is your sense of their role in this and how that plays?
I spoke to U.S. officials in Egypt this morning about this exact issue, and Egypt is beginning to play a bigger role, I would say, than Qatar. I think they're recognizing that they need to step up. So we're thankful that Egypt is doing this, but Qatar, no question, has traditionally been the one that we would go to try to solve some of these problems. I do think that in a crisis like this, we diplomats need to take one thing at a time. The first thing they need to work on is freeing the hostages. We should not be having talks of ceasefire or rebuilding Gaza or what to do with the Arab group and how their roles are going to play out. Those conversations are not appropriate right now. Right now, we just need to focus on getting the hostages free. This is a violation of international law, and every single country should recognize freeing the hostages is the only important conversation. Egypt has a role, Qatar has a role, but so does Israel, and so does Joe Biden. We need to pressure the Biden administration to stay focused on releasing the hostages. All the other conversations can come later.
All right, thanks, Rick. We appreciate it. Rick, of course, senior advisor to us here at the ACLJ, part of the ACLJ team. Your support of the ACLJ allows us to have people like Rick Renell that are experts. I mean, we've got 2 cabinet members that are part of our team. Mike Pompeo, Rick Renell, and, of course, we still work with John Ashcroft, who was a former attorney general. So, folks, your support makes a huge difference. If you could support the ACLJ monthly, $5 a month, $10, $20, whatever it is, you become a champion for life, liberty, and freedom. You become the backbone of when we do those matching challenges. You're part of that match. You are people that engage in the matching challenge. So we want to encourage you to do that at aclj.org/champions to give monthly. You see the work. We've described what we've done, whether it's globally or right here in the United States. aclj.org/champions.
Israel is under attack. And every day I see ordinary Israelis acting as champions. Not to win medals or glory, but literally fighting for their very right to live, to exist. Being a champion means choosing to do what's right, to do what's hard, no matter the cost. Here in Israel, it can be a dangerous stand to take, but it's essential if the Jewish state is going to survive. As an ACLJ member, you have an opportunity to be a champion too. You can make a difference. You can impact real change and defend life, liberty, religious freedom, while the media and the misinformed march in support of terrorists, even in America. You can stand strong for Israel. By becoming a monthly donor, you can become a champion of life, a champion of liberty, a champion of freedom, a champion for Israel. Become an ACLJ champion. Go to ACLJ.org champions now.
Keeping you informed and engaged. Now more than ever. This is Sekulow. And now your host, Jay Sekulow.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to the second half of the program. Logan's joining us. So I think a little bit of a recap. We covered a lot of territory this morning, including our 40-year-plus work with Pat Mahoney and the Christian Defense Coalition on the issue of life.
Yeah, I think it was a great segment. It was really, if you didn't get to see it, go back and watch, because it really gives you a breadth of scope of everything that we do here, and that we don't also give up on some of these clients after it's not one and done. For a lot of these people, especially those who they're passionate about the issues they care about, it's not just a one-time deal. They're going to need defense the rest of their lives. And thankfully, with someone like Reverend Mahoney, we've been there since the late 80s, continually working with him when he needs it, which is honestly fairly often. Because when you're taking these stances, even if the law is on your side, a lot of times you have a lot of uneducated people who don't understand the law, including in law enforcement, who sometimes they're trying to just do the job they think they're supposed to do. And you have to have people like the ACLJ ready to take the battle, take the fights. And a lot of times you can find a very unique perspective. So what I liked about this case specifically, it's grotesque, it's disturbing, sometimes hard to listen to, but you're able to take a different approach, where I think a lot of other, say, Christian legal defense groups may say, oh, well, we believe abortion is murder, therefore this is what this is. What you're able to do is actually reframe this as more of a murder investigation, a crime, a true crime. It comes like a true crime story. It doesn't feel like, and that's how you start winning over people's minds and hearts. It's how you reframed everything for religious freedom and making it a First Amendment issue, not a religious freedom issue. It's the same kind of thing when it comes to life. It's finding a way to reach people who are maybe otherwise unreachable by just faith alone.
So for 2 years, this was supposed to be investigated. There is actually a D.C. law that the medical examiner is required to perform an autopsy after any mysterious death, and here nothing's been done to examine these babies, determine their cause of death, or provide them with a proper burial. But it was obvious when you saw them that that was the product of a late-term abortion. So, yes, it's pro-life, but there was a crime committed, and it's not equal justice under the law when they're not getting their fair share.
Right. It's abortion distortion once again. If, this had been any other situation, of course the medical examiner would be doing the exam. But not here, because there were 5 babies that looked like they were late-term abortion, partial birth abortion, which is a crime, and there needs to be an autopsy done on these 5 children, and there was not, and they were still holding them. And then Biden's DOJ comes in and says, destroy them. This last Friday, we were able to jump in and stop that destruction of evidence.
I also want you to remember that this is last Friday when we were involved in one of the bigger Supreme Court battles ever in the ACLJ. But we have a big enough team and a strong enough team to be able to pivot and deal with what is, at the end of the day, dealing with 3
life and death issue.
Right. Life and death issue, but an issue that you'd think, oh, we're busy. We're a busy team. We can't do this right now. But no, we have such a breadth of scope in terms of the amount of ACLJ team members that can pivot at a moment's notice and get this taken care of. Again, whether you are President of the United States or former President of the United States, or down to just an individual protester on the streets, trying to support life.
We had a very nice series of articles written about our briefs that were filed in the Supreme Court case, saying that we laid out the case that even Justice Jackson and Justice Kagan seemed to adopt those articles, as did, I think, most of the court. What's interesting, you're right, Logan, as that was going on, we still had the capacity internally to handle this other issue, which was as equally important for the people involved in this.
That's right. And again, that's where ACLJ champions come in, because they allow us to have the attorneys ready and the ability to turn on a dime and to shoot off a letter and to stop these babies from being destroyed.
I think we started the day with 19,265. Be very curious to see where we are towards the end of this broadcast. If you want to become an ACLJ champion, I encourage you to do it right now. I'd love to see that 19,265 over 19,300. Don't know if that's possible in a day, but that would be great. Go to aclj.org/champions, aclj.org/champions. Become a champion for life, liberty, and freedom. Your support for that work of ours on the life issue takes a lot of different dimensions, but we're here to help the people that are on the front lines defending life. So support our work as well. Be a champion for life at aclj.org/champions. Back with more. We're going to take a look at the big deadline today at the Supreme Court for President Trump.
Some people think champions are bored, that it's a title that requires something only a handful can ever possess.
There are times in our lives that we are called, every one of us, to step up and serve a cause greater than ourselves.
Even when the loudest voices in the room say it's wrong, that it can't be done. It can be a difficult stand, but it's one any of us can make, including you.
You can be the change. You can make that difference.
You can be a champion. We cannot do what we do without you.
By becoming a monthly donor, you can become a champion of life.
A champion of liberty, a champion of freedom.
Please join us. Become an ACLJ champion today.
ACLJ champion reporting for duty. And I say it that way because without you guys, I could not bear the news that I'm hearing. You're fighting for decency worldwide.
Hey, Jordan. Hey, Jay. I just want to let you know that I've supported ACLJ for 30 years and continue today. Thank you for all that you do.
Yes, I'm a small monthly donor for several years. I love that you explain the law according to the Constitution and that you fight for everybody, the big guy and the little guy.
I can't think of how many times the ACLJs were working over Christmas and Thanksgiving and New Year's while the rest of us are on vacation. Is there any other organization in our country that would be fighting for these kinds of things?
This country, I believe, is in an emergency. You've said it, Jay, but we are being attacked in the legal realm. We need brilliant and dedicated attorneys for what ails us. Let's make sure the ACLJ has the armor it needs through our giving to fight for us. Please join our family of supporters. Have the peace of mind to face the new year boldly.
Welcome back to Sekulow. We also may take some phone calls, 1-800-684-3110.
Especially on this topic,
if you have a
President's immunity.
If you have a question or comment, this would be a good time to call. We'll try to get you in the final segment, 1-800-684-3110.
So last week at the Supreme Court in the United States, we were dealing with the issue of the president being taken off the ballot. And based on the questions that came in oral argument and the briefing that was done, I think we're pretty confident that we're going to see a victory in that case. Maybe that the president's not an officer under the United States or an officer of the United States, so that he's not subject to the 14th Amendment. Could be that it's not self-executing. In other words, there needed to be some kind of enabling legislation. Whichever way they go, we outlined both of those in our brief, and we've gotten a lot of kudos on that brief. I'm not saying that to brag, by the way, but we filed a lot of briefs on this. Law professor at my alma mater at Emory said, he keeps records of these things, said this was the 24th case where I was counsel of record for a party. 24th case. And he wrote a very nice thing to the faculty at my alma mater saying the way they laid this thing out, you had Justice Brown Jackson, as well as Justice Kagan, Justice Sotomayor, asking questions right off of what we argued, which is important. But there's another issue coming up to the Supreme Court. That was last week. This is this week. And now it is a requirement that the D.C. Circuit ruled against the president on the issue of presidential immunity. They said that what they will do, the clerk is directed to withhold the issuance of a mandate through February 12th. Now, let's first describe, Andy, what is a mandate?
Mandate is an order from the appellate court to the trial court to the district court. Here is our opinion. Here is our ruling. Now you follow it and do it. And this would mean that Judge Chutkan, if the mandate were issued, would go ahead then and put the case on the trial calendar again, which she had previously and had taken it off pending the ruling of the Court of Appeals.
Okay, so that issue of a mandate will be stayed so long as today President Trump's legal team will file a stay of the district court of the Court of Appeals decision and say that we'll be following up with that a petition for certiorari. Will, can we check to see if during this broadcast live, I'm sure they're going to, well, I shouldn't say I'm sure, I don't know that, but I would think they're going to do it. Now, the issue of presidential immunity is not an easy one. It's a complex case. And, Harry, when we talk about presidential immunity, let's define what we're talking about for people.
The quintessential issue that we have to look at with respect to presidential immunity is whether or not the President of the United States can be held liable subsequent to his resignation or when he becomes a private citizen, whether or not he can be held liable for official acts during his presidency. And I think one of the real issues that should be explored on appeal, should President Trump decide to appeal his case to the Supreme Court, is whether or not his immunity as president continues after he's left the presidency. And I think the appellate court, that is the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals, they offered the wrong test. So at the end of the day, the issue is not necessarily whether President Trump gets immunity with respect to all of his challenged acts, but whether or not the appellate court has offered the correct test of whether he gets immunity or not.
Here's what I would do if I'm not representing him in this. I know what I suspect they're going to go for the absolute immunity on the entire case to get that adjudicated. But if I'm looking at process, this is what I would say. To me, there's clear error in this case when the court said at 12:01 on January 20th, presidential immunity ceases. In other words, it doesn't continue into his post-presidency, which totally defeats the point of presidential immunity because now it subjects Presidents Carter, Presidents Bush, President Clinton, President Obama, President Trump, and now President Biden to post-White House service lawsuits for opinions or situations you disagreed with. So the immunity should stay in place longer. Now, does that end the case? No, because then they would have to determine whether that was an official act. But that would be a separate proceeding, and that would take time. And if the idea in this strategy, and we're talking about legal strategy here for President Trump, is to delay this because it's getting awful close to an election, and he's clearly the leading Republican candidate, and then have it adjudicated afterwards, or if he's president, get it dismissed, I think that would be the strategy I would utilize.
Yeah, because it is ridiculous for this lower court to say you can only invoke presidential immunity while you're in office. That doesn't make sense. That immunity follows you for any official acts you did while in office. So you're exactly right. That's what needs to be attacked. And then if it draws out the other issues longer, so be it. And that's actually good for President Trump.
Andy, you looked at two issues you were concerned about, that one and also the burden shifting, that you came into this with we're going to presume that everything in the indictment was true.
Yes, that was another statement that was made in the Court of Appeals opinion that I think is wrong. For purposes of the adjudication of the case, they said, we assume that everything that is alleged in the indictment is true. And that's not what the law is. The law is those are simply charges of the grand jury. They're simply allegations that are made by the grand jury. They're not true. As a matter of fact, the government has to prove the truth of those, each and every one beyond a reasonable doubt to the satisfaction of a jury. And that's another statement that was made by this panel consisting of Judges Henderson, Childs, and Pan that I think was wrong and that should be reviewed by the Supreme Court.
The question, I guess, Harry, is on an issue like this, where's the court likely to go? And on presidential immunity, it's been a mixed bag, to be blunt.
I think that is correct. And I suspect if President Trump's lawyers opt for the strategy that you recommend, Jay, they would likely prevail, at least in terms of delaying the case so that it would not affect the 2024 presidential election. On the other hand, if they decide to go for the full enchilada and basically claim that the district court is absolutely wrong, that the president is entitled to absolute immunity, I think they are likely to lose and probably lose quickly, thereby accelerating the trial on the underlying issues. And so I think at the end of the day, President Trump's lawyers would be wise to accept Jay Sekulow's advice.
Logan, you have been in our pre-meeting saying, and I think this is an important point, explain this so people understand why it impacts them.
Yeah, why does it impact them, and why is it not just the same as every other Trump lawsuit? Or you get a little burned out by all of it. I've been burned out by it. I feel like our audience probably is. They just see another lawsuit pop up. They see another ruling. They see another indictment. And it's just at some point you're just exhausted by it. but it's important. There are things that are important, and it does really trickle down to everyone.
This one affects the operation of the presidency. So if you're a Republican, a Democrat, if you're for Trump, if you're for Biden, if you're for RFK, whoever you're for, it affects everybody. Because what this says is that they cannot make decisions free of lawsuit the moment they're out of office. And that possibly is the worst possible decision. I think the biggest mistake the D.C. Court of Appeals made was that determination.
Yeah, because now you have any sitting president triple checking, double check, quadruple checking every decision they make. Once I'm not president any longer, does this set me up for liability and criminal liability? And so all of our past presidents, Obama, all of them, they are subject to this. If the court gets it wrong, they can have claims brought against them just as easily.
Exactly. And Andy, goes so for the people that are listening, and why does it matter to you? For our presidency to function properly under our constitutional republic, this immunity is necessary.
Yes, you can't have a president constrained by having to think about whether or not he or she is going to be prosecuted criminally or attacked civilly in a case after their presidency is over because of a decision that they made during the presidency that is determined afterward not to have been an official act. You've got to have that presidential immunity survive so that citizen Biden or citizen Trump is not such that they are not clothed with presidential immunity after the termination of their term of office, Jay.
Yeah, I think this is, look, I just got a note from a friend of mine, very well-respected lawyer, on another case, Logan, unrelated, I won't get into it, where we filed a brief. And this was a lawyer that represents groups that are more left of center and politicians more left of center. He goes, and his note to me was, I am so thrilled we meet again on this important case. These issues that we engage in, many of which we don't even talk about, like the administration of the criminal justice system, are critical to how we function as a society.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, we're headed to our last segment of the broadcast, and could not do this work at the ACLJ without your support. And you've given generously. You've also decided to become ACLJ champions. We encourage more of you to become ACLJ champions. And all that is simply saying you are going to commit to being a reoccurring donor on an automatic basis to the ACLJ, and you can stand up for all these issues, for life, for liberty, for freedom, for Israel. We're going to talk a little bit coming up in the next segment. A lot of these topics are very hard to talk about. Whether that's obviously we talked about the first segment with a life issue. You're talking about destroying children and what that really means and what that looks like legally. It's very tough to talk about that, especially talk about that on the radio or on broadcasts on social media. We know it's tough around your kids, but it's important work getting done. And we're going to be talking about in the next segment here as well some of the motives that are starting to kind of work their way out of the shooting that happened yesterday at Pastor Osteen, the Lakewood Church. We're going to discuss that coming up in the next segment as well. But again, thank you for your support. We'll be right back.
Trump and his lawyers are on the brink of yet another Supreme Court fight. They are facing a Monday deadline to ask the justices to block an appeals court ruling against Trump's claim of presidential immunity from prosecution.
If Donald Trump does nothing, then the case on Monday will go back down to the district court, the trial court, which can resume its proceedings and presumably would set a trial date for a few months out.
I think it's almost a certainty that he will file a motion to stay. What he's asking to do is stay the mandate. So stay the circuit sending the mandate, which is basically passing the ball back to Judge Chutkan. And he will ask her to the Supreme Court to stay the mandate pending his filing of a petition for certiorari. I don't see why he would file the petition by Monday night because, one, he wasn't directed to. The circuit said all you have to do is file a motion to stay by that time. And two, his lawyers have been pretty busy this past week, and they probably haven't gotten it written yet.
The judges attempted to hamstring Trump's ability to ask the full court to review this case. How do you expect Trump will deal with that aspect?
Ordinarily, Trump would have the option to ask the whole court to rehear it, and that would extend this process even further. They truncated that by essentially saying you can ask, it will not stop the clock unless we agree to rehear it. So there's a strong disincentive, frankly, for now Trump to try to go that route. And so my expectation would be that on Monday we will see him go to the Supreme Court through his lawyers because the D.C. Circuit is not going to be so appealing at this moment.
One of the things you'd like to say if you're trying to get the Supreme Court to take a case is there's disagreement. Individual judges have disagreed or circuits have disagreed. Here we've had unanimity between the district court judge and then the three Court of Appeals judges last week. I think the way Trump would phrase this to the Supreme Court is to say, this is a hugely important issue. This has to do with the scope of presidential powers and the structure of our government. We don't have any Supreme Court precedent on this, so you as the Supreme Court ought to jump in and take this case. I think that's how he's going to frame it.
Broadcast, everyone. I want to turn our attention to a situation that happened at our friend Joel Osteen's church at Lakewood Church yesterday that got some attention in the afternoon. Of course, Super Bowl Sunday, so not as much. But there was a shooting, and the shooter is deceased. Yep. There was a 5-year-old that is in either critical condition or deceased. Yeah. We don't know yet. Go ahead,
I think
Logan.
there'll be an update here in the next few hours from the church. But yeah, it definitely did. It made some news. You probably got a push notification on it, but it was handled very quickly, very swiftly by the team at Lakewood Church in Texas. It was right before their Spanish-speaking service, so not necessarily during their biggest service. But we've been friends with the Osteens and supporters of theirs, so it definitely hit home as someone who really does appreciate the work that they do. But now news has come out just in the last little bit that on the weapon itself was written "Free Palestine" on this rifle.
That's not making a ton of news.
It started to, and I think because it hasn't, I think this is probably what they'll discuss at the press conference. The ABC News headline is a bit egregious because this is the world we're living in. And look, if you've ever been a supporter or viewer of Joel Osteen or Lakewood Church, you'll know they probably casually support Israel. I think Benjamin Netanyahu was spoken there before, and they have had some pro-Israel leanings, but there's certainly not a church that gets engaged highly in politics. Whether their personal feelings feel the way one way or the other, that is the least likely of those churches, of sort of the mega churches, that you feel like would get targeted because of their support of Israel. But what that tells me is basically if you're claiming to be an evangelical Christian, that you are now a target to this movement. And look, they say this is what the ABC News report is: "Free Palestine" written on gun in shooting at Lakewood Church, but motive a mystery. That is the current situation. They're saying motive a mystery. Well, hopefully we're going to find out that maybe there's some reason they're putting that in there. But to me, if you're willing to write the headline that "Free Palestine" was written on the gun, the motive is pretty clear. It was a horrible situation where the female shooter entered with a small child and started to open fire, claimed to have a bomb. She was taken out very quickly. Unfortunately, just due to essentially a child being used as what would be considered a human shield at this point, the child was wounded. Another random...
And we don't know the condition other than critical.
No, yeah, and they may not even say. We may not have an update, but they handled it very quickly. Pastor Osteen was out there.
But on the weapon, it said "Free Palestine."
That's according to the sources that have come out in the last hour or so.
Yeah, and it's ridiculous that they say, but the motive is a mystery, because if you're using a weapon to target people in a church or anywhere, and on that weapon, you literally take the time to write "Free Palestine" on it, I think you have the motive written out on the weapon itself.
No, there's no question. I mean, I think the whole thing is absurd that they would be denying motive. Now, here's the thing that we have to understand. This issue is an important issue, and it's one that is getting a lot of angst in the world right now because of the nature of the conflict.
Yeah, like I said, I mean, if they're going after, sure, it's a mega church. It's one of the biggest in the country. But again, not a politically motivated church by any means. I'd say maybe to the critique of a lot of people, not a politically they do not engage on those issues typically. But this is a very different kind of situation. But because you're lumped in as an evangelical Christian, all of a sudden you're a target from people who are spewing hate against Israel.
Yeah. And by the way, the "Free Palestine" written on the gun and shooting at Lakewood Church, but motive a mystery, is a headline from ABC News. Now, one thing I have to say is it goes back to what we're doing at the United Nations on all of this, and I think it's important to point that out to people.
Yeah, I mean, the misinformation and disinformation surrounding Palestine is everywhere. And so we are able, especially at the United Nations, which is the one international body that targets Israel and condemns Israel more than any other member state under its jurisdiction. And so we are able to be at the United Nations and stand up for Israel. And we just did so, filing a written submission during the 55th session of the Human Rights Council that supports Israel, that points out the crimes, the war crimes that Hamas has committed against Israel, and is calling on the international community to actually condemn Hamas and support Israel.
Whether they'll do that or not is almost irrelevant, Logan. It almost doesn't matter because we have to make the point. Like they're making the point with the gun that says Free Palestine. So the violence coming out of that group now, it's not so passive. And it's horrible, and hopefully that child's okay, but used as human shield, maybe their own child. Who knows? We don't know any of those facts.
You'll learn more. They're doing an update at 2:30 Eastern. So
all right, so there may be more coming out of that. Look, we said we would take some phone calls and comments. We're doing that at 1-800-684-3110.
All right, we'll go to Mike, who's calling in Pennsylvania online, too. Mike, you're on the air.
Just to circle back on the immunity question, I'm trying to figure out how you guys would reconcile both sides, meaning on the one hand, the appellate court saying, okay, no immunity, and we know the dangers and risk of that. But on the flip side, allowing the immunity, but then you invite the potential of something like the now classic SEAL Team 6 situation where the president, by way of immunity, could take out his political opponent.
Yeah.
So how do you reconcile the two, extremes, if you will? Thank you.
Not the way they answered it. Not the way President Trump's lawyers answered it at the oral argument. I think it's very simple. Presidential immunity does not give you immunity to commit a crime of assassinating your political opponent, because the overriding principle in the United States for law enforcement, in any, whether it's Secret Service, FBI, CIA, or local police, keep the peace. It's like, could a president take a? Remember that question came. Could he take a weapon and go down Fifth Avenue and shoot somebody? No, they could keep the peace. But the question there would be not whether presidential immunity applied, but whether presidential immunity would cover that kind of act. And the answer is that would not be within the scope of official acts that would allow for a claim of immunity. But you don't even have to get there yet with this, because under this court scenario, the immunity itself expired after the fact, as soon as he was out of office. But you've got to determine whether that's official acts. And clearly, assassinating your political opponent is not an official act.
Right. Absolutely. That is the answer, is that you can't hire a hitman, basically, even if it was SEAL Team 6, to go and take out your political opponent.
No, those questions they sound crazy and hard, but they're not. Apply common sense and you get there. We'll see what the lawyers do. It's going to be up to them. Will, I asked to see where we were on our champions for the day, because we started the day around, and I know we lose some, gain some during the day. We're at 19,265. What are we at right now? We're at 19,266. Folks, I want to get to 19,300 by tomorrow, if possible. And I know that sounds like not much, but it's a lot, because we're asking people to give monthly. So, Logan, that's a lot for people to commit to. We understand that, but we really appreciate it. And we have some people that came in and have done it for a couple of years, and then it's time for them. They move on.
Yeah, I mean, just like any other reoccurring, it's not like you can't cancel. Obviously,
Right.
You can cancel at any time, and but we appreciate the support for people who decide they want to become ACLJ champions, to stand up for all the topics you heard about today, and to get a big understanding of how it all works. And I think that's something that's very important as well. You can be a champion today, be a champion again of life, liberty, freedom, Israel, and really just every topic that you feel is important. We'll be there, and we'll be there fighting for you.
You know, it's interesting, and just go to aclj.org/champion. Mari said that she thinks the ACLJ rocks, so does the band, and she's a champion. Katie on Rumble said she went to ACLJ Films this weekend and watched the 2 abortion movies. So we have a lot of resources available, a lot of content. ACLJ Films is one of those. Talk to you tomorrow.